Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Our new narrative today is May 12th, 2020. And today I want to present two different topics that you normally don't hear together. I don't think I've ever heard anyone put these topics together. And that is, well, I'll tell you by telling you the title. Racism is not the problem. It's the erosion of our purchasing power. And before I get started, I want to remind you or request that you like, share, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. All right. So the reason for the topic today is those two subjects came across my desk today. Racism in the form of, I had a question about the Trayvon Martin hoax documentary, The Witness Fraud that divided America. And after that, I saw something on our purchasing power, and I thought that I'll try and present information on both and tie them together and to show their relevance, right? So I kind of consider this like a magic trick. Hopefully I can pull it off. But I'm going to start with some information I got from Mr. Peter Schiff. Some of you may know of him. He has a podcast, very influential, very you can call him famous in the gold space. And on one of his podcasts, he was talking about how government inflated tuition. And so I'm taking this information, some of these stats directly from that podcast, and I'll leave a link to that podcast below so you can watch that podcast in its entirety. But let's just dive in right here. So in 2009, 1 year tuition at Yale was $35,000. In 2019, 1 year tuition at Yale was $50,000. That's an increase of 43% over the course of 10 years. Now, that in itself, I'm sure you're like, woo, but everything is relevant, right? And so, and everything needs to be put in some type of context. So I'll put this in terms of gold, right? So the tuition for Yale in 2019, to cover 1 year, you would need about 33 ounces of gold. Okay. And for those gold bugs out there, you'll get it. For those who are not into gold yet, hopefully the end of this podcast will inspire you to start getting into gold, researching it, and as someone says, getting your weight up. Okay, so in 1810, Mr. Schiff goes on a little further back in history. In 1810, 1 year of tuition at Yale, I wonder if you can guess it. I'll give you a second. One, that's it. It was $33. Fast forward 42 years, 1852, 1 year tuition at Yale was, take a guess, $33. I bet you didn't guess that. Okay. And to give you some context, it would take 1.2 ounces of gold to pay tuition at Yale for 1 year. Gold was about $20 an ounce back there. Okay. So he goes a little further forward to 1874, and tuition at Yale was $140. And in 1918, tuition at Yale had increased to $160, an increase of 14% over a 44-year period, which included a world war, right? So if you decided, because most people didn't go to college back then, but if you decided you wanted to send your kid to school, wouldn't cost you that much money. And how do we know this? Well, we can go to 1914. And Mr. Ford of the Ford Motor Company put everybody on the $5 a day salary. And that equates to about $1,300 a year. And during that time, again, the tuition at Yale was $160, which equates to about 45 days of labor. And you have to remember then too, or if you don't remember, I'll let you know, in 1914, when you got paid $1,300, you didn't pay any federal income tax. There was no Social Security tax, no Medicare. They probably were not paying union dues, probably wasn't paying insurance. So you took home $1,300 and you needed about 45 days of labor to pay 4 years worth of tuition. Now today, 2019, 2020, someone at Ford works, they make about 40, the average, I guess, 45K, $40,000 to $45,000 a year, minus income tax, state income tax, Social Security tax, Medicare, probably union dues, the health insurance, right? And that parent, in order to pay for 1 year of tuition at Yale, would need to work 1 year and 4 months. And you gotta remember, in 1914, most families just had one income, one breadwinner, and you would be able to send your kid off to school with 45 days to the best school in the nation. One of the best. I mean, top 3, top 10, whatever. With 45 days worth of your labor. Whereas today, you would need a year and 4 months to do that. And today, you're probably looking at 2 parents with one income. There's very few families that have one income today. Okay, so now I'm gonna try and wave in this racism thing, and it's not what you think. So before you turn the channel off, it's not what you think. So one argument would be, well, due to racism, blacks couldn't go to Yale, so none of this matters. That's the point I want to bring up. We tend to, our education system, our communities, black, white, other, tend to look at that time period from the Civil War through like the 1920s as like this black hole of racism, and nothing else happened. It was just, it was after slavery, and then there was Jim Crow, and nothing else happened. Well, what actually, other stuff did happen. And one significant thing that did happen was the creation of the greatest economy the world has ever known, either before or since. And that economy was based on a currency. Well, the currency in that economy was backed by gold. We were on the gold standard, and we were able to do something no other nation had ever done in the history of mankind. And that is create this ridiculously high standard of living. And we did it on a gold standard. So if you were a racist victimizing someone, or if you were a black being victimized by someone, after that particular incident, if you went to work or whatnot, the currency that you were using, that you raised your family on, that you bought your house with, or that you rented an apartment, or that you were paid in, it was backed by gold. So it's important, and I think it's very important. And I think the fact that we ignore it has been to our detriment. And to go back to that argument, well, it didn't, blacks couldn't go to Yale, so it doesn't pertain to black people, is false and ridiculous. First of all, not everybody went to Yale. No, I mean, when was the first person in your family to graduate from Yale, right? So it's not like everybody could just go to Yale. It's not a 7-Eleven. It's very exclusive college to go to. But this guy named Alexander Twilight, he graduated. No, Edward Bouchet graduated from Yale in 1874. So black people could go to Yale. And 1874 was about 10 years after the Civil War. And before that, in 1823, this guy named Alexander Twilight, loved the last name. He is apparently the first African American to graduate from a college with a bachelor's degree in America. It was Millbury College. So just like today, we have to assume that black people started college but may not have finished college. So black people could go to college back in the 1800s. Maybe they didn't go to Yale, but the vast majority of college students didn't go to Yale, couldn't get into Yale. But what they could do was pay tuition somewhere, and that tuition was used with currency backed by gold. Okay. Now, like I said, when we think of that period, America's history in general, or post-Civil War up through the Jim Crow era, we tend to only think of specific racist incidents and objective racist policies and laws, right? And I think I need to define objective racism and subjective. So objective racism, an example of that would be Dylan Roof going into a church, shooting up the church members because they're black. He hates black people for whatever dumb reason. He hates black people. That's objective racism. And that is incidents of objective racism has always been relatively small compared to perceived subjective racism, right? A subjective racism would be something like, I didn't come to a total stop and he pulled me over. I can't believe it. The cop is racist. Wait, you don't know? You don't know. He could just need to make a quota or whatever, or he didn't see you almost stop. He just thought you blew through it, whatever. Anyway, there's room for doubt. So there's objective where there's no room for doubt, subjective where there is room for doubt. Now, during that period, back in the day, the world's greatest economy, pre-1971, when we got off the gold standard, not to say that we lived in a utopia, but, and I'm saying that because we did have objectively racist laws on the books, but during that time, the black family in particular was a lot stronger. So you had black kids being born at an 85% clip to two-parent households. When we got off the gold standard in 1971, you see a deterioration in not only the black family, but the white family as well. So in the black family, you're seeing kids being born at a 75% rate to single parents, right? But we have no objectively racist laws on the book. But, we're led to believe that racism is everywhere. It's worse than ever. You can't turn on the news or watch a movie or, without this victimization narrative being blasted at you. We got politicians running their entire campaign with promises to protect the black community from the racists lurking in your bushes, right? And again, by the way, I have to suggest again that you check out the Trayvon Martin Hoax documentary. It's free on YouTube at this point, I believe. The Trayvon Martin Hoax documentary, The Witness Fraud That Divided America. It's definitely, you're going to have to look for that. Make sure you get the right video when you do. There's other documentaries out there. Get that one. It's by Joel Gilbert. Okay. Now, the black community today may be better off materially than we were in 1876 or whatnot, but the family has eroded, like I said. And since 1860, it's been eroding faster. And after 1971, it's kind of falling off a cliff, sad to say. When we were on a gold standard, you could have these type of families. Like, I'm not saying all black families were like this, or all white families were like this, or Asian families, whatever, but this was a possibility. You could have an architect who could raise his family, design a house, build a house, live in Southern California, have a wife that stays at home, have a live-in maid with 6 kids and a new car off one salary and not be a billionaire, right? And on that gold standard, you can have families like that. And those families were portrayed on TV. Like you had the Jeffersons who moved on up off of one salary. You had the Bunkers, Edith didn't work. You had the Evans. James was the one out there looking for work. Florida wasn't never trying to look for a job, right? They didn't have to because the purchasing power of the currency that they were using was backed by gold, and it kept prices in check and inflation in check and politicians in check. So if you want to just say, well, you shouldn't just have to have a male at the head of the household, whatnot. Okay. Well, you had Mabel Thomas of What's Happening. Remember Raj and Denise, and you had Rerun. They weren't, Rerun belonged to somebody else. But Mabel, she worked. She was a single mother raising 2 kids off one income. And not to be outdone, you had Elaine O'Connor Nardo of Taxi. She raised her kids working at a taxi cab company. Now, who can do that today, right? So, and I want to be inclusive here, so I'm going to include the LGBTQ community in this. I don't have a TV version to give as an example, but I'm going to assume, I hate to make assumptions, but I'll just assume that if you're 2 men or 2 women and you're trying to raise a kid, you would prefer that one of you stay at home to raise a kid instead of shipping them off to a total stranger. Well, back then, although the laws may definitely be against you, you could pull that off with one, your laws on the books may have been against your lifestyle, but if you could do it, you would be able to raise a family off of one income back then. But today, you need LeBron James' income to do what Mike Brady did. LeBron James is a multi-millionaire. And I don't know if you've seen this, but Eddie Murphy just was like, hey, I kind of need to come out of retirement because I got 10 kids. Now, I'm sure Eddie Murphy isn't going broke, but to sustain that lifestyle, he needs some more money, which is ironic to me because I grew up and my best friends, his father worked at Chrysler, and he was able to provide for his family. They lived in a very nice house. We lived in a very nice neighborhood at the time. They had 10 kids, one salary with a wife that stayed at home. Now, I got gray hair, but I'm talking in the 80s, right? I would love for someone in the comment section to tell me they know of a family that's living well off one income with 10 kids at a regular job. Now, I ain't talking about, I know this guy, he hit the lottery or he makes $18 million a year or $1 million per year, and he has like 7 kids and a stay-at-home wife. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about a guy who worked at Chrysler. He didn't own Chrysler. He was in lower management, right? So, and he was African American. So there you go. So how did this happen? What happened to our purchasing power? How did this happen? So when a nation's money can be created out of thin air, that nation's politicians can make promises for anything to anybody for a vote, right? I think that's plain and simple. They can make these promises because, hey, just print the money out of thin air. This is May 12th, and right now, the Federal Reserve Bank, is printing money out of thin air, right? But we have to remember, the government has no money. The citizens have the money. So all that money that's being printed up, we have to pay back. And so when politicians are able to make all these promises because the money isn't backed by anything, we have 3 really serious and negative consequences. 1, Citizens began to rely on government before they rely on themselves and their family. 2, higher taxes. All these trillions of dollars that are being printed up, guess who has to pay that back? We do. And then 3, which what I've been talking about for the past, I don't know how long this has been going, 20 minutes. Inflation. Now, the Brady Bunch was the example. Yale's tuition is an example, right? Now, can you imagine the purchasing power of our currency this time next year, May 12, 2021, after we've printed up trillions and trillions of dollars, right? You can't create gold out of thin air. And because you can't create gold out of thin air, if we were on a gold standard, politicians' promises and spending would naturally be kept in place. But since these things haven't been kept in place, one paycheck just won't do. In some cases, 2 paychecks won't do. I've heard of plenty of situations where you have both parents working and one of the 2 or both of them are doing Uber after they do their 40-hour job. And this is only going to get worse, right? So politicians have used politicians have used the promise to protect the black community from omnipresent racists and bushes, right, to get into office. And as black people, these promises sound good. And as non-racist, if you're a non-racist person who doesn't want to be affiliated with racism, it sounds good to you too. So a perfect example is, you're a white person, you don't believe in racism, you don't want to be affiliated with that. So if you hear some politician saying we have to fight against racism, you're attracted to that out of the goodness of your heart or out of some form of guilt or some sense of guilt. And for those who don't care about racism, hey, the free stuff sounds great, right? So, but you see, hopefully I've explained what that does. The long-term effect of that is not good. And so when we have politicians creating money out of thin air, it doesn't matter if you're in the Nation of Islam or the Klan or either one. Your purchasing power, dominated in fiat currency, is worth less and less. Now, it's my firm belief that Americans of all races, creeds, sexual orientation will continue to lose the purchasing power of our labor unless the black community and others outside of the community who care about the black community come to the realization that America's focus on subjective racism and America's combined disregard concerning the purchasing power of our labor will lead us all off a financial cliff. Now, as of this podcast, I may be too late with this coronavirus thing, basically putting the economy on lockdown. I may be too late with this, but if you're interested, just go back to what was going on in the economy before the coronavirus hit. We were already tilting off a cliff. Now with the coronavirus, it kind of covers over what was really wrong with the environment. Let's say back in 2019, December of 2019, where you had people, not in the mainstream media, but on YouTube and stuff like that, warning that something big was about to happen. It happened. No one saw the coronavirus, but the underlying problems of the economy were there. The underlying problems of the economy were there before the coronavirus hit. Now, I do talk to people about this, and, most people just want to believe that this won't happen. Somebody come in, swoop in and say today America's too big to fail type of thing. But history always repeats itself, and no fiat currency has ever lasted. And when it dies, it's painful for everybody, right? And if you want an example of what happens when a currency dies, you can check out the Weimar Republic of 1919 to 1933. Or if you want a newer or a more recent example, you can check out Zimbabwe. And again, now why am I singling out the black community? And that's because, like, since the 60s, you know, we have been, I think, the most reliant community on government assistance and protection. And in most cases, that assistance and protection was warranted. But since the 60s, since, you know, the civil rights era has ended, more often than not, in my opinion, politicians use racism as a shepherd, herding in our community's voting power to push through regulations that increase government spending for the politicians' benefits. And these policies, decrease individual freedoms to all of our detriment, right? So no matter what group you belong to, black, white, woman, man, LGBTQ, religious, atheist, you're an individual first with individual rights and responsibilities. So you got to remember that. And for all those yelling white power or black power or woman power or LGBTQ power, in a way, you're just providing the gasoline politicians are using to burn down our house. Now, I'm in no way saying or suggesting or inferring that the issues these communities bring forth are not important. What I am saying is don't let your community be used to tear down a nation, right? So here's a solution. I'm going to strongly suggest that you look into gold and silver, monetary reform. Having your currency backed by gold is an option. It's been proven to work. I mean, it's 5,000 years, right? Goes back 5,000 years. Gold money works. Another solution may be sovereign money, which is basically debt-free money. What we currently have now is a debt-based monetary system. And I'm not going to get into all that, but that's what it is. An alternative to that could be getting us back on a gold standard and or sovereign debt, where we just don't, our money is debt free. Okay. And I think I'm going to end it there. Again, hopefully you subscribe and share this. You definitely please share it with someone, get a conversation started. Let me know what you think in the comments. And in the description, as always, I'm going to leave a link to a website called End Slavery Now, and there you can learn about organizations who are currently fighting the fight against slavery, that is human trafficking and labor slavery, so that you can get involved there and not just complain about stuff that happened to somebody else in the past. You can actually help someone who's under the iron foot of oppression today. So yeah, just want to alert you to that. I'll leave Peter Schiff's the link to his show, to that podcast below. And again, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks.